Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. I hope you are doing well, and if you're not, I hope you are soon. Okay, today we are going to be taking a look at a prototype version of Nanolith, an RPG, a cyberpunk RPG board game. I was contacted by the designers of this game. They asked me if I wanted to take a look at this game because it is going to be hitting Kickstarter soon. I looked at what they had and I agreed to it because I thought there were enough interesting things to make something meaningful about. And I don't do a lot of Kickstarter preview coverage, and I try to only do it when I think there is something interesting to show or something interesting to talk about. I am not getting paid for this preview coverage. I am doing it because I think the game looks interesting. However, the designers are going to donate a copy or two to the Dungeon Dive once everything has been fulfilled, and I will be able to give away those copies to Dungeon Dive viewers. I will probably give those away to people on the Patreon. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Nanolith. Let's talk about the kind of game it is. I'm going to give a brief overview of the game and how a game is played. And then I'm going to talk about 4 things that I really do love about the game. I'm going to talk about one thing that I personally like, but it could be a mixed bag for some people. And then I'm going to briefly discuss 2 concerns that I have with the game. So what kind of game is Nanolith? Nanolith is a cyberpunk adventure game, and there are not a lot of those, so I am really glad that this game exists. In this game, you are always going to be playing 4 cyberpunk heroes. The party will be 4 characters, and the game is balanced for those 4 characters, and you do have to take all 4 characters into a game. So the characters you will have are Ada, the support character. You will have Ashitaka, the protector. You will have Korra, the hacker, and Valith, the aggressor. And those characters will be represented by a character card, and that character card will have a number of stats on it, have different kinds of defense against different kinds of attacks like melee or ranged or nano attack or hacking attacks. And then each character will also have a number of weapons. They have these starter weapons here. So Ada has her nano pulsar. Ashitaka has his really cool katana. Korra has an interesting thing we'll talk about. She has a little sidekick character. We'll talk about that in a bit. And then Valith here has his canopus, some kind of like crazy electro spear type thing. And then each character will also have their combat values for their different types of attack, such as melee, ranged, and hacking attack. And it shows how many dice that they can use when they attack. All attacks are done using D8s. That's kind of cool. You don't see a lot of games using D8s for their attack dice. I like that. And then each character will also have an ultra ability, and we'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. So you're going to be taking your characters. Now, the prototype does come with some minis. I believe that the minis are going to be part of a deluxe version, and I believe that the standard version is going to come with these acrylic standees. I prefer these acrylic standees over the minis. They're just easier to store. I would actually prefer if they were just cardboard, just to keep plastic low. But I'm glad that I'm glad the game is going to have acrylic standees rather than minis. And I believe you'll just have to pay extra for the minis. If I'm wrong, hopefully the designers will comment on this video. But you're going to be taking your party of cyberpunk heroes, and you are going to be working through a series of missions in an encounter book that is a lot like the encounter book for Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion, or perhaps one of Jerry Hawthorne's adventure book games. And you will have on one side, you will have the map page that you will be working through with different squares that will have different things, such as different things that will block your line of sight or block your movement, or some different elements that you can interact with, such as these little hacking terminals. And then on the right side, you will have these special rules for that particular scenario. In this case, you will be fighting against one of the bosses, And the bosses in this game are actually controlled by a deck of AI cards that will have certain abilities and certain AI routines that the different bosses will have to follow. So that is kind of cool. So each map will have the map on one side and rules on the other. I do like that. And then you will also be working your way through a storybook. And the storybook will have choose your own adventure elements that you will have to make choices. And depending on the choices you make, depending on the outcome of your missions, and depending on the different quest cards that you have found on your missions, certain things will open up. You will have certain paths will be made available, certain paths will be blocked off, and there really does seem to be some meaningful choices to be made in this game, and that is one of the things that I have been enjoying so far about it. And those meaningful choices that you can make in this game are found in many of the various elements of the game, from the character interactions, from your character, the way you can manipulate the board, the way you can use the various elements on the map, the way you can interact with the storybook, and the way the game progresses. There really does seem to be a focus on choice, and I'm hoping that those meaningful choices are apparent and abundant in the entire campaign of the game. Okay, so now let's talk about 4 things that I really do like about Nanolith. Okay, the first thing that I do like about Nanolith is just its cyberpunk theme. There are far too few cyberpunk adventure games, and I've always wondered why. The cyberpunk theme seems tailor-made for board games, and there are a few cyberpunk board games out there, but there aren't a lot of adventure games, of dungeon crawls, of these kinds of games that I like and I talk about on this channel. So I was really happy to see something like this. Now, cyberpunk is a genre that, while I am not an expert in, not even close, it's a genre that I don't read a lot of. However, some of my favorite books of all time are cyberpunk. We have some of those over here. Alfred Bester, The Star's My Destination. I've talked about this book many times on the channel, and this really is ground zero for cyberpunk from the early 60s. And then we have Rudy Rucker's Freeware, the Wares series with realware, freeware, software, and then his kind of math punk, trans-realist cyberpunk book, White Light. Richard Paul Russo's Carlucci trilogy is fantastic. And then this Fiction 2000 is a really interesting nonfiction book. It's a collection of scholarly essays on cyberpunk. This book here, called Counterfeit Worlds, is a book all about movies based on Philip K. Dick's work. And Dick is cyberpunk adjacent, with I think A Scanner Darkly probably being his most traditional cyberpunk narrative. Here we have a really funny book called Head Crash, and that's actually written by Bruce Bethke. And Bruce Bethke was actually the guy who coined the phrase cyberpunk in his short story of the same name. This is a really, really funny book that I highly recommend. And then, of course, we have the ubiquitous, kind of the ground zero of the modern cyberpunk, of when people think of cyberpunk, they think of Neuromancer by William Gibson. And then, of course, the follow-ups to that, Count Zero and Mona Lisa Overdrive. I've actually been really wanting to reread this trilogy, so I think I'm going to do that probably early next year. But my favorite work of cyberpunk is City Come a Walkin' by John Shirley. And the reason I like this book so much is it focuses on the punk more than the cyber of cyberpunk. I don't get the punk feeling in very many cyberpunk stories, but I get that very strongly in City Come a Walkin', and that is most likely because John Shirley was in a lot of punk bands when he was younger, and also as an adult. And there is a really cool passage in here where he actually describes this angst rock that is, this book focuses on a band. And the band is led by a female singer named Katz. And I want to read this passage here because I think it is so good. So this says, the quiet was unnatural and everyone waited for it to end. That expectation was more than satisfied when the band slashed into its opening set. There was an explosion of fuzz and feedback, and the lead guitar running through a fierce opening solo that sounded like an unoiled winch, squealing as it strained to lift a ton of loose scrap metal. The thunder of the bass tied the heavy metal grind into a single charging unit as bolts hold together a speeding army tank. Katz put aside her rhythm guitar and began to sing. Cole, frowning, decoded her screech. The lead guitar took a long solo defining youth in the language of electricity. I love that sentence. That is just so evocative. Really, really well written. Let's continue. Katz danced in 100 permutations of the moth's last spasm as it burns in candle flame. Katz kicked the bass player in the ass and laughed and pinwheeled her arms and jumped 4 feet in the air, spun, kicked the lead guitar on the way down, slapped knees, clapped her hands, landed square on the stage, snaked her neck, shook her ass and shoulders in double provocation, and never missed the beat. The drums and bass quieted in dramatic preface, and her over-large golden eyes got bigger yet. Her pixie-cut platinum hair clung to her head with sweat. Her face lost all uncertainty, and she nodded at the man in the mirror sunglasses, and she sang. So, man, just talk about a great description of punk rock, of angst rock in the book, and probably maybe one of the first mentions of mirrored sunglasses in a work of cyberpunk. So really, really good. If you have not read City Come a Walkin' and you like Cyberpunk, I do highly recommend it. So that's one thing. It's a simple thing, the theme, but it's really important. And I think a lot of the mechanisms in Nanolith do point to and strengthen that theme. And so let's talk about that right now with point 2. Point 2 being the action selection method. So this is one of my favorite mechanisms in all of games. As a matter of fact, we just had a discussion about this mechanism on the Dungeon Dive Facebook group. I love games where you roll dice and assign those dice to actions. It's one of my favorite things in all of board games. And this game, I think, utilizes it really well. And I think this mechanism does help strengthen the cyberpunk theme because it kind of represents this interaction between the cybernetic mechanical body of your characters and how they can push themselves to do really cool superhuman things. But because of the mechanical nature of their body, they might stress out their parts. And then in stressing themselves out, they actually end up taking damage. And you can purposefully take damage or purposefully stress yourself out to do more heroic things. I think that is super, super cool. So what you do is at the beginning of one of your turns, the first phase, you're going to roll 5 of your action dice. And then these are going to be the dice that you can assign to certain actions. The first thing you're going to do is if you ever roll a 1, you automatically take a point of stress and you move your stress cube towards the right. As you take stress, you are going to be moving your stress cube down. If it ever reaches the last spot on your stress track, then you get to take one of these, I think, nano something tokens, nano ability. These are basically your ultimate ability tokens. As you get more stressed out, you will trigger an ultimate ability. You can take that token, and then each of the characters has an ultimate ability that they can use by spending your ability token. However, each time you gain one of these tokens, you move a red cube from the right towards the left, thus shrinking your stress meter. So it causes you to become stressed out more as you are taking more and more actions. And as you, every time you get stressed out, you also take 2 points of damage. So you have to, so when you roll a 1, you automatically get a point of stress. And then you can use these dice to trigger different movement abilities or different skill abilities. For movement, you can assign a die to your action track there, and then you can move that many number of pips. And the maps will have different squares that you can move through. And so you can move freely from one square to the next orthogonally. Red lines, those will block sight and they will block movement. Certain squares in certain scenarios will have blocking tokens. So like you can't get through this fire unless you move around and you come to another square that has a special ability on it to where you can use an action to like push over this this canister of liquid, and that'll fall and that'll put out the fire, and then you can put out, you can move through those squares. Some of the maps will have these interactive interaction spaces where this is a jump space. So you could use a die of 4 or higher to jump from one point to the next. And each of the scenarios will have different ways, different actions that you can spend in order to interact with the map in different ways. Another thing that you can do is you can spend your dice on to use your weapons. So this, all of the dice shown on your cards are the minimum value that you have to spend. So this needs a 3 or higher. So you could spend a 3, put that there, and then you could use your weapon. And then the weapon will tell you what kind of attack it is, if it's ranged attack or if it is a melee attack. It will tell you the range of that attack, and then it'll tell you how many D8s you add to your dice pool for that attack. But you also always add your character's innate combat ability. So in this instance, Ada here would also add a D8 for any melee or ranged attack. And then you roll those D8 together, and you are looking to, when you are attacking an enemy, you are looking to hit a certain value or more, depending on the type of attack you are doing. And each value that is over that causes 1 point of damage to the enemy. Then there are also various kinds of attacking. There is melee, ranged, you can do nano attacks, and you can also do hacking attacks. And hacking attacks will you usually have to assign a certain number of cubes to kind of a hacking box, and you need a certain number of hits in order to hack certain pieces of equipment. But on this action track, there are also these exclamation points. So as you take more actions, you will actually become more and more stressed out. At the beginning of each turn, you're also going to move your stress meter 1 or your stress cube to the left two spaces. So you do need to manage your stress. It's going to be going up, going down, going up, going down. But eventually it is going to trigger your ultimate ability, at which point you will take 2 points of damage, and you will also get your token in order to spend that on your ultimate ability. That is super, super cool. I also like that the skills that you trigger will have to be done with a combination of different dice. So this needs a double of 2 or more. This needs a straight of 2, 3, or 4, or 3, 4, 5, 4, 5, 6, and so on. This one you can use a double 2, a double 3, a double 4, and so on. Another thing that I do like about the game is how easy it is to decipher the iconography on the skill cards. You hardly even need to read the rules in order to tell what this is doing. So for instance, on this med kit, I could spend 2 doubles of a 2 or higher, and I could heal up to 3 points of damage, or I could heal 1 effect on an ally in a line of sight range of 6. Super, super easy. And as they get more complicated, they remain just as easy to read. For instance, blood transfusion. A standard enemy in line of sight within range 6 gets 2 automatic damage, ignoring armor. Also, an ally in line of sight range 6 heals the same amount of damage. So a really simple iconography system that is fun to read, or easy to read, I should say. I don't know if that's fun to read, but it is super easy to read. Another thing I like on the skills are these things called nano sync abilities. And this is why it is, the game is balanced to play with 4 heroes, and it is really important to work as a team. When you use an ability that has a nano sync character on the bottom, whenever Ada uses her sick gas injection skill, Valith can assign one of his dice to his action track to make her skill stronger. So she could add 1 red attack die when Valith adds another die to his action track. Whenever Ashitaka uses his provoke ability, Ada can spend a die on her action track in order to allow that ability to affect one more enemy. If Cora here uses her little hacker bot here, Ashitaka can assign one of his dice, and he says you may then activate a program for free. So let's talk about the sidekick. Let's talk about Cora's little sidekick. This is super cool. So Cora is a hacker, and her main weapon is this little sidekick dude, this little robot. And he can come out on the map, and he will act just like another hero. He has his own stats, but Cora has no gun or sword or anything, and the sidekick doesn't have any weapons. However, the sidekick has an ability to download a program from an enemy. On the enemy cards, in the upper left-hand corner is some numbers, and these numbers correspond to certain programs. So the Biomutant has programs 1 and 2. The security droid has programs 3 and 4. Those programs are represented by these cards here. So we have program 1 through 4. We have slash, grab, laser, and abort. And these have a hacking profile. So when the sidekick wants to utilize its download program ability, Cora would have to spend a double of 2 or higher, and then she would have to do a hacking attack against this ability, hitting a 5 or higher. And then once this program is hacked, you could assign this program to the sidekick, and then that becomes an ability that sidekick can trigger on its turn. I absolutely love this. This is such a cool thematic element to this game, hacking the abilities of enemies in order to use them as weapons against the enemies. Very, very cool. One final thing that I really like, a great positive, is the interaction between the storybook and the encounter book. So the encounter book will have these double pages, and these are called lobbies. And there will be different ways that you can interact with the lobby. Each one of these little text blocks will have certain things that you can do. Some of these text blocks are going to be defragmented code, and you have to find these various quest items while you are playing the game in order to unlock certain doors, in order to gain access to certain things in the encounter book. And when you gain access to one of those things, you will turn to a paragraph in the storybook and you will read that, and you will usually have to make some kind of choice. There are also different choices that you can make in here, which will allow you to trigger certain things in the encounter book. And then finally, in the storybook, you might come across these little puzzle pieces. Those puzzle pieces mean that there's some kind of hidden information on this page, and you have to find that in order to progress, in order to unlock a certain thing. And I think that is really, really cool. I like that this isn't just art. There are things you need to look at, you need to pay attention, and you need to make choices on each page in order to unlock certain things and in order to progress. Point number 5 is a plus or minus depending on your take on legacy elements. So like Gloomhaven, the first pages of this book are a map, and this is Neo Eden here. And Neo Eden is where the story is going to take place. You will be adding stickers to this in a legacy element to unlock certain missions. And then you will be moving around this map. And then there are also, the prototype at least, comes with a whole page of stickers that you can use to augment your abilities. For instance, Ada's nano pulsar here has 2 locked abilities on her weapon. When she gets enough experience points or enough money in order to buy upgrades, you can buy these upgrades and you can add those upgrades to your weapons. So the weapons are upgradable. That is super cool. You can also add pips to your abilities for your combat abilities to add more dice to your dice pools. There are also stickers that you can augment your skills for. So you could heal up to 4 damage, or you can also change the values that you have to roll in order for your skills. You can add different stat different defense abilities to your character. So there are all kinds of different ways to add things to your character, to upgrade your character. You can also add different character profiles to your nano sync abilities on your skills. Now, for those people who don't like putting stickers on their cards, I totally get that. You could always sleeve your cards and put the stickers on the sleeves if you wanted to do that. Um, for me, that kind of legacy element is a plus, especially when the choices are meaningful. And that is one thing that I think this game is doing really well, is presenting meaningful choices in all aspects of the game, from the way you take your turns, from the actions you perform, balancing that stress and how the stress relates to your actions and relates to your health. There are meaningful choices to make in the narrative, and there seems to be meaningful choices you make in how you upgrade your character and how your character progresses. So there are a couple things that a couple concerns that I have. And both of those concerns really do have to do with just this being on Kickstarter. Well, one of those definitely does. And let's talk about that. I am hoping that this game avoids the Kickstarter bloat. Especially these days, we've seen it over and over again recently, how Kickstarter campaigns have finished, and then because of rising manufacturing costs, because of rising shipping costs, the designers, they have to come back to the backers and ask for more money. That could be alleviated by just making a smaller campaign. I hope this game doesn't suffer from Kickstarter bloat. And I think that kind of does work in with its theming a little bit. Most cyberpunk stories are pretty short. They're concise. They're to the point. It's a genre about direct kind of confrontation and being direct. Cyberpunk characters are always like, they're very blunt. And I'm hoping that this is a game that just doesn't get overtaken with Kickstarter sprawl, let's say, to keep this on the cyberpunk theme here. I'm hoping this is not a Kickstarter with 10 boxes with 10 expansions built in. And I want to see it succeed, and I want to see it be concise. I want to see it be something that I want to see all of. And that is probably the second point of concern that I have, is I hope that the narrative isn't super bloated. I would rather see a narrative style closer to something from a cyberpunk book, something where I'm able to finish it, and it doesn't take months and months and months of time. I'm hoping that the encounter book just isn't 500 pages like Madara is. Madara was just such an overwhelming amount of content, and I would rather see something smaller and more concise. So I have no clue about what is in store for the actual campaign. I don't know the kind of expansions or add-ons they're going to be offering as stretch goals, but I want to see more Kickstarters with less bloat. But so far, I think there are a lot of positive things to say about Nanolith. There are interesting mechanisms as far as how you select your actions. I love the dice rolling and using the dice to select your actions. I love how the skills work. I love the iconography. I like the nano sync ability. I like the way that the characters interact with each other. I like the way that the characters can interact with some of the spaces on the map boards. I like the way that the storybook and the encounter book interact. And I think that the game is pretty fun on a turn-by-turn basis. I was having fun playing as these characters. And I'm just really excited to see something in the cyberpunk genre in this adventure realm. So, all right, guys, well, I hope you enjoyed taking a look at this prototype version of Nanolith. And we will talk to you later. Bye-bye.